Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind troubled with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Does your spinning mind keep you awake? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems. The ones you can't solve right now and will be easier to solve well rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns of the story, but slowly letting go and drifting into sleep. Let my voice wash over you at a comfortable volume and allow yourself to be distracted from the stresses and worries that play on your mind. Whether you need help falling asleep or going back to sleep in the middle of the night, you can trust me to keep you company and help you to wake up tomorrow in a rested state. You may need to try out Sleepy Time Tales for a few nights to get used to this slightly strange idea, but I believe it will be well worth your while. I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So settle down, relax, and allow yourself to get lost in my telling of tonight's story. Before we get to tonight's reading, I'd like to ask for a few minutes of your time. Sleepy Time Tales is a listener-supported podcast. I can only keep it going, I can only pay for the services and tools that I use and justify the time that I spend on it, thanks to the support of listeners like you. So if you're finding Sleepy Time Tales useful, if it helps you to get a restful night and you would like to help keep it going out to thousands of insomniacs just like you, please consider supporting on the Patreon at patreon.com/sleepytimetales. This is a monthly support that not only helps me keep the lights on, but can also get you fun bonuses based on your contribution level. So go along there, take a look, and sign up if you're willing. But if monthly seems a big ask, you can also make once-off tips to the tip jar on the website. And if you'd like to help out Sleepy Time Tales without having to take on any additional financial burdens, you can do so just by spreading the word. Whether in person or on social media, if you think people will benefit from listening to Sleepy Time Tales, just let them know. And that's enough of that. Let's get on with the relaxing stuff. We pick up this week with the history of art for beginners and students, painting, sculpture, architecture, by Clara Erskine Clement Waters. And we pick up learning about the life of Giotto. Giotto had a wife and 8 children, of whom nothing is known, but that his son Francesco became a painter. Giotto died in 1337 and was buried with great honors in the church of Santa Maria del Fiore. Lorenzo de' Medici erected a monument to his memory. The pupils and followers of Giotto were very numerous, and were called Giotteschetti. Among these, Taddeo Gaddi and his son Agnolo are most famous. Others were Maso and Bernardo Dedado, but I shall not speak in detail of these artists. While Giotto was making the art of Florence famous, there was an artist in Siena who raised the school of that city to a place of great honor. This was Simone Martini, who lived from 1283 to 1344. And is often called Simone Memmi because he married a sister of another painter, Lippo Memmi. The most important works of Simone which remain are at Siena, in the Palazzo Pubblico, and the lower church at Assisi. There is one beautiful work of his in the Royal Institution at Liverpool, which illustrates the text, "Behold thy father, and I have thought thee sorrowing." While the papal court was at Avignon, in 1338 Simone removed to that city. Here he became the friend of Petrarch and of Laura, and has been praised by this poet as Giotto was by Dante. Another eminent Florentine artist was Andrea Orcagna, as he is called, though his real name was Andrea Agnolo di Cione. He was born about 1329 and died about 1368. It has long been the custom to attribute to Orcagna some of the most important frescoes in the Campo Santo at Pisa, but it is so doubtful whether he worked there that I shall not speak of them. His father was a goldsmith, and Orcagna first studies his father's craft. He was also an architect, sculptor, mosaicist, and poet, as well as a painter. He made an advance in color and in the painting of atmosphere that gives him high rank as a painter. As a sculptor, his tabernacle in the church of Or San Michel speaks his praise. Mr. C.C. Perkins thus describes it: built of white marble in the Gothic style, enriched with every kind of ornament, and storied with bas-reliefs illustrative of the Madonna's history from her birth to her death. It rises in stately beauty toward the roof of the church, and whether considered from an architectural, sculptural, or symbolic point of view, must excite the warmest admiration in all who can appreciate the perfect unity of conception through which its bas-reliefs, statuettes, busks, intaglios, mosaics, and incrustations of pietre dure, gilded glass, and enamels are welded into a unique whole. But perhaps it is as an architect that Orcagna is most interesting to us, for he it was who made the designs for the Loggia de' Lanzi in Florence. This was built as a place for public assembly and the discussion of the topics of the day in rainy weather. It received its name on account of its nearness to the German guardhouse, which was called that of the Landsknechts, or Lanzi, as it was given in Italian. Orcagna probably died before the Loggia was completed, and his brother Bernardo succeeded him as architect of the commune. This Loggia is one of the most interesting places in Florence, fully in sight of the Palazzo Signora, near the Gallery of the Uffizi, and itself the storehouse of precious works of sculpture. There were also in the early days of the 14th century schools of art at Bologna and Modena, but we know so little of them in detail that I shall not attempt to give any account of them here, but will pass to the early artists who may be said to belong to the true Renaissance in Italy. Chapter 3. Painting in Italy, from the beginning of the Renaissance to the present century. The reawakening of art in Italy, which followed the darkness of the Middle Ages, dates from about the beginning of the 15th century and is called the Renaissance. The Italians have a method of reckoning the centuries which differ from ours. Thus we call 1800 the first year of the 19th century, but they called it the first year of the 18th. So the painters of what was to us the 15th century are called by Italians the Quattrocentisti, or men of the 14th century. And while to us the term Cinquecento means the style of the 16th century, to the Italians the same century, which begins with 1500, is the 15th century. I shall use our own method of reckoning in my writing, but this fact should be known to all who read or study art. The first painter of whom I shall now speak is known to us as Fra Angelico. His name was Guido, the son of Pietro, and he was born at Vicchio in the province of Mugello in the year 1387. We know that his family was in such circumstances that the young Guido could have led a life of ease, but he early determined to become a preaching friar. Meantime, even as a boy, he showed his taste for art, and there are 6 years in his life, from the age of 14 to 20, of which no one can tell the story. However, from what followed it is plain that during this time, he must some way have devoted himself to the study of painting, and to preparation for his life as a monk. Before he was fully 20 years old, he entered the convent at Fiesole, and took the name of Friar or Brother Giovanni. Soon after, his elder brother joined him there, and became Friar Benedetto. Later on, our artist was called Friar Angelico, and again Il Beato Angelico. And according to Italian custom, the name of the town from which he came was added, so that he was at last called Il Beato Giovanni Detto Angelico da Fiesole, which means the Blessed John, called the Angelic of Fiesole. The title Il Beato is usually conferred by the Church, but it was given to Friar Angelico by the people because of his saintly character and works. It was in 1407 that Friar Angelico was admitted to the convent in Fiesole, and after 7 years of peaceful life, he was obliged to flee with his companions to Foligno. It was at the time when 3 different popes claimed the authority over the Church of Rome, and the city of Florence declared itself in favor of Alexander V, but the monks of Fiesole adhered to Gregory XII, and for this reason were driven from their convent. 6 years they dwelt at Foligno, then the plague broke out in the country about them, and again they fled to Cortona. Pictures painted by Friar Angelico at this time still remain in the churches of Cortona. After an absence of 10 years, the monks returned to Fiesole, where our artist passed the next 18 years. This was the richest period in his life. His energy was untiring, and his zeal, both as an artist and as a priest, burned with a steady fire. His works were sought for far and wide, and most of his easel pictures were painted during this time. Friar Angelico would never accept the money which was paid for his work. It was given into the treasury of his convent. Neither did he accept any commission without the consent of the prior. Naturally, the monk artist executed works for the adornment of his own convent. Some of these have been sold and carried to other cities and countries, and those which remain have been too much injured and too much restored to be considered important now. He painted so many pictures during this second residence at Fiesole, not only for public places, but for private citizens, that Vasari wrote, "This father painted so many pictures which are dispersed through the houses of the Florentines, that sometimes I am lost in wonder when I think how many works so good, and so many could, though in the course of many years, have been brought to perfection by one man alone." In 1436, the great Cosimo de' Medici insisted that the monks of Fiesole should again leave their convent and remove to that of San Marco in Florence. Most unwillingly the brethren submitted, and immediately Cosimo set architects and builders to work to erect a new convent, for the old one was in a ruinous state. The new cloisters offered a noble field to the genius of Friar Angelico, and he labored for their decoration with his whole soul, though the rule of the order was so strict that the pictures in his cells could be seen only by the monks. He put all his skill into them, and labored as devotedly as if the whole world could see and praise them, as indeed has since been done. His pictures in this convent are so numerous that we must not describe them, but will say that the crucifixion in the chapter room is usually called his masterpiece. It is nearly 25 feet square, and besides the usual figures in this subject, the Saviour and the thieves, with executioners, there are holy women, the founders of various orders, the patrons of the convent and companies of saints. In the frame there are medallions with several saints and a sibyl, each bearing an inscription from the prophecies relating to Christ's death, while below all, St. Dominic, the founder of the artist's order, bears a genealogical tree with many portraits of those who had been eminent among his followers. For this reason, this picture has great historic value. At last in 1445, Pope Eugenius IV, who had dedicated the new convent of San Marco and seen the works of Angelico, summoned him to Rome. It is said that the Pope not only wished for some of his paintings, but that he also desired to honor Angelico by giving him the Archbishopric of Florence. But when this high position was offered him, Friar Angelico would not accept it. He declared himself unequal to its duties, and begged the Pope to appoint Friar Antonio in his stead. This request was granted, and Angelico went on with his work as before, in all humility fulfilling his heaven-born mission to lead men to better lives, through the sweet influence of his divine art. The honor which had been tendered him was great, one which the noblest men were striving for. But if he realized this, he did not regret his decision. Neither was he made bold or vain by the royal tribute to which the Pope had paid him. From this time, the most important works of Friar Angelico were done in the chapel of Pope Nicholas V in the Vatican, and in the chapel which he decorated in the Cathedral of Orvieto. He worked there one summer, and the work was continued by Luca Signorelli. The remainder of his life was passed so quietly that little can be told of it. It is not even known with certainty whether he ever returned to Florence, and by some strange fate, the key to the chapel which he painted in the Vatican was lost during 2 centuries, and the pictures could only be seen by entering through a window. Thus it would seem that his last years were passed in the quiet work which he best loved. When his final illness was upon him, the brethren of Santa Maria sopra Minerva, where he resided, gathered about him, and chanted the Salve Regina. He died on the 18th of February, 1455, when 67 years old. His tombstone is in the church of Santa Maria sopra Minerva in Rome. On it lies the picture of a Dominican monk in marble. Pope Nicholas V wrote his epitaph in Latin. The following translation is by Professor Norton. Not mine be the praise that I was a second Apelles, but that I gave all my gains to thine, O Christ. One work is for the earth, another for heaven. The city, the flower of Tuscany, bore me. John. In the convent of San Marco in Florence, there are 25 pictures by this master. In the Academy of Florence, there are about 60. There are 11 in the chapel of Nicholas V, and still others in the Vatican Gallery. The church of Santa Maria Novella, Florence, the Cathedral of Orvieto, the church of San Domenico in Perugia, and that of Cortona are all rich in his works. Besides these, a few exist in some of the principal European galleries, but I love to see them in San Marco, where he painted them for his brethren, and where they seem most at home. The chief merit of the pictures of Friar Angelico is the sweet and tender expression of the faces of his angels and saints, where any beings are holy and good. He never succeeded in painting evil and sin in such a way as to terrify one. His gentle nature did not permit him to represent that which it could not comprehend, and the very spirit of purity seems to breathe through every picture. Two other Florentine artists of the same era with Friar Angelico were Masolino, whose real name was Panicale, and Thomas Guidi, called Masaccio on account of his want of neatness. The style of these two masters was much the same, but Masaccio became so much the greater that little is said of Masolino. The principal works of Masaccio are a series of frescoes in the Brancacci Chapel in Florence. They represent the expulsion from paradise, the tribute money, Peter baptizing, Peter curing the blind and lame, the death of Ananias, Simon Magus, and the resuscitation of the king's son. There is a fresco by Masolino in the same chapel. It is the preaching of Peter. Masaccio was in fact a remarkable painter. Someone has said that he seemed to hold Giotto by one hand and reach forward to Raphael with the other, and considering the pictures which were painted before his time, his works are as wonderful as Raphael's are beautiful. He died in 1429. Paolo Uccello, 1396 to 1479, and Filippo Lippi, 1412 to 1469, were also good painters, and Sandro Botticelli, 1447 to 1515, a pupil of Filippo, was called the best Florentine painter of his time. Filippino Lippi, 1460 to 1505, was a pupil of Botticelli and a very important artist. Andrea Verrocchio, Lorenzo de Credi, and Antonio Palagiulo were all good painters of the Florentine school of the last half of the 15th century. Of the same period was Domenico Ghirlandajo, 1449 to 1494, who ranks very high on account of his skill in the composition of his works and as a colorist. He made his pictures very interesting also to those of his own time, and to those of later days, by introducing portraits of certain citizens of Florence into pictures which he painted in the church of Santa Maria Novella and other public places in the city. He did not usually make them actors in the scene he represented, but placed them in detached groups, as if they were looking at the picture themselves. While his scenes were laid in the streets known to us, and his architecture was familiar, he did not run into the fantastic, or lose the picturesque effect which is always pleasing. Without being one of the greatest of the Italian painters, Ghirlandajo was a very important painter. He was also a teacher of the great Michelangelo. Other prominent Florentine painters of the close of the 15th century were Francesco Granacci, 1477 to 1543, Luca Signorelli, 1441 to 1521, Benozzo Gozzilli, 1424 to 1485, and Cosimo Rosselli, 1439 to 1506. Some good painters worked in Venice from the last half of the 14th century, but I shall begin to speak of the Venetian school with some account of the Bellini. The father of this family was Jacopo Bellini, 1395 to 1470, and his sons were Gentile Bellini, 1421 to 1507, and Giovanni Bellini, 1426 to 1516. The sketchbook of the father is one of the treasures of the British Museum. It has 99 pages, 17 by 13 inches in size, and contains sketches of almost everything: still and animal life, nature, ancient sculpture, buildings and human figures, stories of the scriptures, of mythology, and of the lives of the saints, all illustrated in its sketches, as well as hawking parties, village scenes, apes, eagles, dogs, and cats. In this book the excellence of his drawing is seen, but so few of his works remain that we cannot judge him as a colorist. It is certain that he laid the foundation of the excellence of the Venetian school, which his son Giovanni and the great Titian carried to perfection. The elder son, Gentile, was a good artist, and gained such a reputation by his pictures in the great council chamber of Venice, that when in 1479 Sultan Mehmet, the conqueror of Constantinople, sent to Venice for a good painter, the Doge sent to him Gentile Bellini. With him he sent two assistants and gave him honorable conduct in galleys belonging to the state. In Constantinople Gentile was much honored, and he painted the portraits of many remarkable people. At length it happened that when he had finished a picture of the head of John the Baptist in a charger, and showed it to the Sultan, that ruler said that the neck was not well painted, and when he saw that Gentile did not agree with him, he called a slave and had his head instantly struck off, to prove to the artist what would be the true action of the muscles under such circumstances. This act made Gentile unwilling to remain near the Sultan, and after a year in his service he returned home. Mehemet, at parting, gave him many gifts, and begged him to ask for whatever best pleased him. Gentile asked but for a letter of praise to the Doge and Signora of Venice. After his return to Venice, he worked much in company with his brother. It is said that Titian studied with Gentile. It is certain that he was always occupied with important commissions, and worked until the day of his death, when he was more than 80 years old. But Giovanni Bellini was the greatest of his family, and must stand as the founder of true Venetian painting. His works may be divided into two periods, those that were done before, and those that after he learned the use of oil colors. His masterpieces, which can still be seen in the Academy and the churches of Venice, were painted after he was 65 years old. The works of Giovanni Bellini are numerous in Venice, and are also seen in the principal galleries of Europe. He did not paint a great variety of subjects. Neither was his imagination very poetical, but there was a moral beauty in his figures. He seems to have made humanity as elevated as it can be, and to have stopped just on the line which separates earthly excellence from the heavenly. He often painted the single figure of Christ, of which Lupke says, by grand nobleness of expression, solemn bearing, and an excellent arrangement of the drapery, he reached a dignity which has rarely been surpassed. Near the close of his life, he painted a few subjects which represented gay and festive scenes, and are more youthful in spirit than the works of earlier years. His two brothers were buried side by side in the church of San Viano e Paolo in Venice. There were also good painters in Padua, Ferrara, and Verona in the 15th century. Andrea Mantegna of Padua, 1430 to 1506, was a very important artist. He spent the best part of his life in the service of the Duke of Mantua, but his influence was felt in all of Italy, for his marriage with the daughter of Jacopo Bellini brought him into relations with many artists. His services were sought by various sovereigns, whose offers he refused until Pope Innocent VIII summoned him to Rome to paint a chapel in the Vatican. After 2 years there, he returned to Mantua, where he died. His pictures are all in large collections. His finest works are Madonnas at the Louvre, Paris, and the Church of San Zeno at Verona. Mantegna was a fine engraver also, and his plates are now very valuable. In the Umbrian school, Pietro Perugino, 1446 to 1524, was a notable painter. He was important on account of his own work, and because he was the master of the great Raphael. His pictures were simple and devout in spirit, and brilliant in color. In fact, he is considered as the founder of the style which Raphael perfected. His works are in the principal galleries of Europe, and he had many followers of whom we have not space to speak. Francesco Francia, 1450 to 1518, was the founder of the school of Bologna. His true name was Francisco di Marco Rabolini, and he was a goldsmith of repute before he was a painter. He was also the master of the mint to the Bentivoglio and to Pope Julius II at Bologna. It is not possible to say when he began to paint, but his earliest known work is dated 1490 or 1494, and is in the gallery of Bologna. His pictures resemble those of Perugino and Raphael, and it is said that he died of sorrow because he felt himself so inferior to the great painter of Urbino. Raphael sent his St. Cecilia to Francia and asked him to care for it, and see it hung in its place. He did so, but he did not live long after this. It is well known that these two masters were good friends and corresponded, but it is not certain that they ever met. Francia's pictures are numerous. His portraits are excellent. Many of his works are still in Bologna. We come now to one of the most celebrated masters of Italy, Leonardo da Vinci, 1452 to 1519, the head of the Lombard or Milanese school. He was not the equal of the great masters, Michelangelo, Raphael, and Titian, but he stands between them and the painters who preceded him, or those of his own day. In some respects, however, he was the most extraordinary man of his time. His talents were many-sided, for he was not only a great artist, but also a fine scholar in mathematics and mechanics. He wrote poetry and composed music, and was with all this so attractive personally and so brilliant in his manner that he was a favorite wherever he went. It is probable that this versatility prevented his being very great in any one thing, while he was remarkable in many things. When still very young, Leonardo showed his artistic talent. The paper upon which he worked out his sums was frequently bordered with little pictures which he drew while thinking on his lessons. And these sketches at last attracted his father's attention, and he showed them to his friend Andrea Verrocchio, an artist of Florence, who advised that the boy should become a painter. Accordingly, in 1470, when 18 years old, Leonardo was placed under the care of Verrocchio, who was like a kind father to his pupils. He was not only a painter, but also an architect and sculptor, a musician and a geometer, and he especially excelled in making exquisite cups of gold and silver, crucifixes and statuettes, which such as were in great demand for the use of the priesthood in those days. Pietro Perugino was a fellow pupil with Leonardo, and they soon surpassed their master in painting. And at last, when Verrocchio was painting a picture for the monks of Vallombrosa, and desired Leonardo to execute an angel in it, the work of his pupil was so much better than his own that the old painter desired to throw his brush aside forever. The picture is now in the Academy of Florence and represents the baptism of Christ. With all his refinement and sweetness, Leonardo had a liking for the horrible. It once happened that a countryman brought to his father a circular piece of wood cut from a fig tree, and desired to have it painted for a shield. It was handed over to Leonardo, who collected in his room a number of lizards, snakes, bats, hedgehogs, and other frightful creatures, and from these painted an unknown monster, having certain characteristics of the horrid things he had about him. The hideous creature was surrounded by fire and was breathing out flames. When his father saw it, he ran away in a fright, and Leonardo was greatly pleased at this. The countryman received an ordinary shield, and this rotello del fico, or shield of fig tree wood, was sold to a merchant for 100 ducats, and again to the Duke of Milan for 3 times that sum. The shield has now been lost for more than 3 centuries, but another horror, the Medusa's head, is in the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, and is a head surrounded by interlacing serpents, the eyes being glassy and death-like, and the mouth most revolting in expression. While in Florence, Leonardo accomplished much, but was at times diverted from his painting by his love of science, sometimes making studies in astronomy and again in natural history and botany. He also went much into society and lived extravagantly. He had the power to remember faces that he had seen accidentally, and could make fine portraits from memory. He was also accustomed to invite to his house people from the lower classes. He would amuse them while he sketched their faces, making good portraits at times, and again ridiculous caricatures. He even went so far, for the sake of his art, as to accompany criminals to the place of execution in order to study their expressions. After a time, Leonardo wished to secure some fixed income and wrote to the Duke of Milan, Ludovico Sforza, called Il Moro, offering his services to that prince. This resulted in his going to Milan, where he received a generous salary, and became very popular with the Duke and all the court, both as a painter and as a gentleman. The Duke governed as the regent for his young nephew, and gathered about him talented men for the benefit of the young prince. He also led a gay life, and his court was the scene of constant festivities. Leonardo's varied talents were very useful to the Duke. He could assist him in everything. By advice at his council, by plans for adorning his city, by music and poetry in his leisure hours, and by painting the portraits of his favorites. Some of these last are now famous pictures. That of Lucrezia Crivelli is believed to be in the Louvre at Paris, where it is called La Belle Ferronnière. The Duke conferred a great honor on Leonardo by choosing him to be the founder and director of an academy which he had long wished to establish. It was called the Accademia Leonardo da Vinci, and had for its purpose the bringing together of distinguished artists and men of letters. Leonardo was appointed superintendent of all the fetes and entertainments given by the court, and in this department he did some marvelous things. He also superintended a great work in engineering which he brought to perfection, to the wonder of all Italy. It was no less an undertaking than bringing the waters of the Adda from Mortisana to Milan, a distance of nearly 200 miles. In spite of all these occupations, the artist found time to study anatomy and to write some valuable works. At length Il Moro became the established duke, and at his brilliant court Leonardo led a most agreeable life, but he was so occupied with many things that he painted comparatively few pictures. At length the Duke desired him to paint a picture of the Last Supper on the wall of the refectory in the convent of the Madonna delle Grazie. This was his greatest work in Milan, and a wonderful masterpiece. It was commenced about 1496, and was finished in a very short time. We must now judge of it from copies and engravings, for it has been so injured as to give no satisfaction to one who sees it. Some good copies were made before it was thus ruined, and numerous engravings make it familiar to all the world. A copy in the Royal Academy, London, was made by one of Leonardo's pupils, and is the size of the original. It is said that the prior of the convent complained to the Duke of the length of time the artist was spending upon this picture. When the Duke questioned the painter, he said that he was greatly troubled to find a face which pleased him for that of Judas Iscariot. He added that he was willing to allow the prior to sit for this figure, and thus hasten the work. This answer pleased the Duke and silenced the prior. And on that quite funny little anecdote, I think I'm going to call it a night. As always, if you'd like to pick up where I'm leaving off, you can find the original on Project Gutenberg at the link in the show notes. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepy Time Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to follow or subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get your new episodes whenever they come out. Good night and sweet dreams.